Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, a big win over the Giants. The Dodgers were ahead and then behind and then ahead again. Shout out to Mookie Betts. Shout out to Trayce Thompson. Not so big shout out to the bullpen. We'll get into all that. And then we have a draft recap with Justin from Future Dodgers. So that's what's on tap. So make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one local sports podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is Locked On Dodgers, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Make it easy on yourself and subscribe in all those places so you won't miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listening or watching, I'm Samperio, and I usually have Snider, but he'll be on a little bit later. And we are both lifelong Dodger fans that have spent time in the press box and in the locker room covering the Dodgers in a variety of ways, or continuing to cover the Dodgers in a variety of ways. One of those ways being this podcast here. And that's what we talk about, the Dodgers, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Coming up, first segment, I'll talk about the game against the Giants, and then the last two segments will be a draft recap with Justin, the Future Dodgers, along with Jeff, our usual guy on Locked On Dodgers. So that's what's coming up, and let's get right into it. The Dodgers, it was a frustrating game, or it was a great game, turned frustrating, turned great again. All in all, the Dodgers won, beating the Giants. But it was a tale of a few games. It was Mitch White pitching very, very well, the Dodgers offense doing well and taking advantage of some mistakes, and then the Dodgers bullpen faltering and the Giants taking advantage of that bullpen mistakes. And then it was the Dodgers reasserting their dominance and showing why they're one of the best teams and almost the best team in baseball. So let's talk about Mitch White first. And yeah, Mitch White coming off a tough outing last time against the Cardinals. It was reported that he may have been tipping pitches, that the Dodgers looked at it, adjusted, whatever. They never really admitted to the fact they was tipping pitches, but that's what was reported or alluded to on social media. But was right back to where he picked up, except that one start in St. Louis, pitching very well, going hitless for 5 innings, ended up giving up a hit to start the 6th, and that's when he came out with 82 pitches. I do think he probably could have stayed in a little bit longer, and knowing what we know now with the way the bullpen handled the game after that, maybe he should have stayed in a little bit longer. But all in all, Mitch White did his job. He continues to be a bright spot for the Dodgers in a temporary filler role, and showing that, you know, he might be a guy in the future, or at least a guy that can do exactly what he's been doing, which is fill in when they need him. So shout out to Mitch White. Shout out to Caleb Ferguson. He made all the outs that he needed to make. He came in after Mitch White gave the hit and retired the side, and then came in and got another out in the next inning. And that's when the trouble started. The trouble started with Phil Bickford. He gave up a home run to Evan Longoria, and then he gave up a walk, and then he gave up a base hit, and then his night was over facing just 3 batters. Alex Vesia comes in, doesn't do much better, and before you know it, the game that was once 5-0 was now 5-5 after Darren Ruff crushed a grand slam off of Alex Vesia pitch that was literally a fastball down the middle. There was no way Darren Ruff was going to miss that pitch. And Vesia or Will Smith and Vesia wanted it high. Vesia did not throw it high, and it was deposited into the left field pavilion to tie the game. And then, uncharacteristically, Evan Phillips came in the next inning, and he struggled a little bit, maybe got hosed a little bit on a call to Jock Peterson, but umpire was bad both sides, both ways. So there were some calls, maybe a little bit more in favor of the Dodgers actually than that, but ended up giving up a run, walking in a run with the bases loaded. And it was one of those like, wow, the Dodgers might lose this game. And it's because they couldn't hold a 5-run lead with their bullpen in the last few innings. But luckily, Gavin Lux, fresh off his sunburn, laying down in the beaches of Malibu, falling asleep apparently. He hits a double. Trayce Thompson comes up with a big hit. He hits RBI triple. That ties the game. And then later on, we know what happened. Mookie Betts hit a 3-run home run to put the Dodgers ahead for good. Greg Kimbrell comes in and closes out the game. Mookie Betts ends the game with a nice diving play in right field. And, yeah, it was not fun for the bullpen specifically, mainly Bickford and Vesia, more so than Phillips. But it was good to see the Dodgers have continued their fight and continue to play to the whistle, quote unquote, which is play till 27 outs. Mookie Betts mentioned that in his post-game interview on ESPN. The Dodgers know they have 27 outs to work with, and they played through those 27 outs. So all in all, I think the real big takeaway is Phil Bickford time. Phil Bickford's days are limited. Assuming Blake Trinan comes back, he threw, and he could be back. Or no, he threw. Gonna see how he feels, but he could be back in a few weeks if everything goes well. Dustin May is gonna start for, I believe, OKC and go 3 innings, and he will continue to go up 1 inning every time out and could come back in the middle of August. You got Andrew Heaney, who threw in Arizona and is working his way back. And then you got, Walker Buehler hasn't started his way of hasn't started making his way back. But all in all, seems like he could come back in September if things continue to progress the way they progress for him. So Phil Bickford, your days may be limited, especially if the Dodgers go out and get someone at the deadline, whether that be a starter that pushes a starter to a relief role, or whether that's a reliever that pushes Bickford out. His ERA was already over 5 going into the game. Interestingly enough, he still has a strikeout rate that's up there above MLB average. He had the walk rate, which is below MLB average in the good way. But he's been susceptible to the long ball and hasn't really been able to be the guy that he was for the Dodgers last year. So similar to Alex Vesia, maybe not so bad. Vesia hasn't quite been the lights-out dominant guy he was last year. He's been kind of middle of the pack with a couple of good stretches here and there. But, yeah, he completely missed his spot, and Darren Ruff hit that very far into the – or it didn't go as far, but he hit it. You knew off the bat it was gone. So concerned for Bickford and Vesia a little bit, but realistically, they were in at that point of the game for a reason, because they aren't the Dodgers' high leverage relievers necessarily. And if they need to be, it's because other guys have pitched and they hadn't. So Evan Phillips, I'm not worried about. It would have. I'm assuming it's going to be a blip on the radar and just one of those days where he just didn't quite have it. Maybe the days off threw them off. But either way, shout out. Trayce Thompson continues to hit right-handed pitching well, although he did have a hit off Rodon also, so that's against left-handed pitching. But he continues to shine in the roles that they put him in. And then Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman with the big home run early on, Mookie Betts with the big home run later on, and then finishing the game with diving. So it was a fun game. It was announced as the largest crowd at an MLB game this season. I know that some people mentioned that was more than the All-Star game. I will say the reason it was more than the All-Star game is because a large chunk of the corner of left field reserve was not paid attendance. It was media. They had to keep it open for the media for the auxiliary press box. I know that there was 3,000 media credentialed for All-Star festivities. I'm not sure entirely how much were there for the All-Star game, but, regardless of all that to say is that there was a lot of people at Dodger Stadium, and there was a lot of people at Dodger Stadium earlier in the week as well. So that's what we're getting into, or that's all we're going to get into. We have Justin from Future Dodgers here to talk a draft recap. He got on with Jeff, and that's what's going to be coming up. So thank you all for listening to me. I'm going to hand it over to. Do you want to create a free job post in minutes and then reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people? Then you need to hit up LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier to grow your team and helps you find the people you want to interview faster and for free. All you got to do is create the free job post, like I mentioned, add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. And did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Which NFL stars moved the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube.
All right, Dodger fans, we promised you draft content, and we deliver on what we promise more than half the time. And so this is one of those times. I am here with Justin from Future Dodgers. Justin, thank you for hopping on with me to talk about the Dodgers draft this year.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. All right, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, my first question, I have a thought on this, and I kind of want to see if you agree with me. The Dodgers drafted 8 shortstops and 2 catchers out of their 19 total picks. And I automatically saw people on social media, oh, they drafted a catcher with their first pick. That means Diego Cartaya is getting traded. They drafted a bunch of shortstops. That means they're not signing Trey Turner. And my impression is that this is almost the opposite, and that basically drafting catchers and shortstop tells you the Dodgers aren't thinking about their big league team at all when they're drafting. They are drafting for value, and middle of the field is the best value. What do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right there. Teams don't draft with their major league needs in mind. Teams that do probably aren't going to do as well.
Yeah, good teams don't anyway.
Yeah, smart teams are not drafting for their major league needs. Except in like the rare case, like for example, with Ben Joyce this year, if let's say, I don't know, like the Yankees, like one of the best contenders just has an abominably bad bullpen, terrible bullpen. They took Ben Joyce in the second round. That's kind of drafting for your major league needs, but it wouldn't be that big of an issue. Of course, they didn't do that. The Angels took him. They have their own pitching needs, but still a good pick. Anyways, yeah, you're right. Catchers, shortstop, center fielders, those guys are middle of the field defensive players, and they can move down the defensive spectrum. If you draft a first baseman or a left fielder and, they get a little slower with age, or, they put on some muscle, they don't move as well, they can't really, there isn't anywhere for them to go down on the defensive spectrum really besides DH. So you're taking those guys in the middle of the field, and you hope they stay there because that's where they're most valuable, but they can move elsewhere. Especially, guys in high school. And someone pointed this out in my mentions. The Dodgers on any given night start like 4 or 5 shortstops because Trey Turner is a shortstop. Gavin Lutz came up as a shortstop. Chris Taylor, came up as a shortstop. Justin Turner came up in the minor leagues and in the big leagues as a shortstop. So all these guys who come up through the minors as shortstops, maybe they move off in the minors, maybe they move off in the majors, doesn't mean anything, especially not with regard to Trey Turner specifically.
So with that said, drafting 8 shortstops is still an interesting choice when you only have 6 minor league affiliates, and all 6 of those currently have guys playing shortstop. And so what are your thoughts on these guys? I would assume, it's, and maybe with only a 20-round draft, maybe it's not as often that you don't sign all your picks. You probably won't sign everybody, but are any of these 8 shortstops that they picked unlikely to sign? And then the second part of that question is, which ones would you see likely to be playing somewhere other than shortstop when they start playing in the Dodgers organization?
So I think, let's just start with the back half, the last 4 all on day 3, 3 high school shortstops and 1 junior college shortstop. I think all those guys are a risk not to sign because they're all under the age of 21. 3 of them, have college commitments that they can go to and, go into the draft in 2 or 3 years and try to make more money, get a higher draft spot. So I don't think any of those 4 in the back half are guarantees. And then Christopher Campos, who was their 7th round pick, he's listed as a shortstop. He also pitched. From everyone that I've talked to about him, he should be a pitcher, in the minor leagues.
The Dodgers don't actually have a history, though, of drafting a position player from St. Mary's and turning him into a pitcher, do they?
No, no one's coming to mind. Actually, there's one guy.
Tony Gonsolin, for those of you who aren't aware, Gonsolin was a position player. He did a little pitching in college and made the All-Star team as a pitcher this year.
Yeah, he was drafted as a pitcher, though. So he was officially drafted as a pitcher. I don't know if it'll change for Campos if and when he starts pitching, but everything I've heard about him has been on the pitching side, and it's exciting stuff. And so he would be their first pitcher drafted if he was, but who knows? Maybe he gets time at both places and they get a little two-way action.
That would be fun. That seems like we did have a couple guys drafted, not by the Dodgers, but by other teams who were officially designated as two-way players. And, there's always been guys. I know James Loney a lot of people thought he might be a pitcher. Dodgers drafted him as a hitter. You always have some of those guys. And then you also have some guys like Kenley Jansen or Pedro Baez or Sean Doolittle who come into an organization as a position player and turns out they can't hit, so they end up pitchers anyway. So who knows what's going to happen with those guys. What's your their first pick, which wasn't until the 40th pick overall, thanks to spending a lot of money and I guess that was just thanks to spending a lot of money. Freddie Freeman was the reason that they didn't draft second until 105th. Dalton Rushing, a catcher from Louisville, another situation that they've had some success in the past. That's Will Smith's alma mater and position. And Dalton Rushing, did you have him on your board, guys you were excited about? And what are your thoughts on him?
I did have him on my big board for the Dodgers 40th pick. Not super high, so not the guy I would have taken, but I'm not in charge for a reason. So there's that. I think, he presents a very typical Dodgers offensive profile. It's power and patience from a premium defensive position. So he's going to hit the ball really hard. His exit velocities are strong. He's super patient, walks a ton, doesn't chase a lot out of the zone. But this sounds like a lot of guys who the Dodgers typically roll out in their lineup and they like to, sign and draft. That's because it is. So he fits that offensively. Defensively, I think most people assume that the electronic strike zone is coming at some point. Doesn't seem like next year, but at some point, he's a guy who's probably helped by that. Him being able to stay behind the plate, probably a little more likely, if and when that happens. But I know Billy Gasparino said that they view him as a catcher and he might get some time at first base, where he played a little bit this year at Louisville, but they see him as a catcher and, just adds to a really strong group of catchers in the minor leagues, led by, of course, Diego Tartaglia.
Yeah, for sure. And then their second pick, their first of 8 shortstops, was Alex Freeland out of Central Florida, I believe. He's young for a college draftee, right?
He is. So he's a draft eligible sophomore. If he were born about 10 days later, he wouldn't even be eligible. And if this draft were in June, like it had been for, the past few decades, instead of over the All-Star weekend in July, he wouldn't have been eligible either, because the eligibility rules, it's, 3 years of college, junior college players, high school players, or college players who will turn 21 within 45 days of the draft. And he turned 21 in about a month. So, just old enough. He was a very highly regarded prep player 2 years ago in the 2020 draft. Ultimately went to school. Hasn't had like a huge season or anything either year. But decent tools, solid hit tool. I think, someone who's still growing into his power. He has the frame for power. He's 6'2". So I think, potentially coming into the Dodgers organization, one thing they've been good at is kind of getting guys to reach more of their raw power and get it into in-game power. And that's really, I think, if they can do that for him, he'll be a pretty exciting offensive player in the middle of the field.
Awesome. Is there any particular, so you mentioned the raw power that maybe will tap into that. Is he kind of fit that mold of a toolsy guy who the Dodgers organization think they can kind of get the most out of? That's what you're thinking here?
I'm not. There are other guys who I'd probably put that label on in this draft. Maybe not him. He's a guy who, if everything turns out well, he's above average hitter, above average power, but not elite in both, if that makes sense.
Okay.
BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events, and then at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online research for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to the website today on your laptop or mobile device, learn more about the action, and learn about everything happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Who are some of those other guys who you think, oh, this is a Dodgers pick? This is the guy the Dodgers think they can turn into something.
That'd probably be Chris Newell, who was their 13th rounder out of Virginia. He was another really, really highly regarded prep player, more so than Freeland 3 years ago. I think, if you look at draft boards, and I haven't looked at them specifically, but just from memory, back in 2019, he was a top 100 prospect as a high school player on most boards, or top 150, whatever it is. And he should have had a lot of money. He chose to go to school, had a huge freshman year. I think he hit like 400 at Virginia. Has not had the same success in his last 2 years. He struggled a lot, swings and misses, but the upside is a 5-tool center fielder there. Whether he eventually becomes that, who knows? There's a reason he went in the 13th round and not the 3rd or 2nd or the 1st, but an exciting player with a lot of upside there in the 13th round.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, that definitely does fit their mold of he's had success, and maybe buying low on him and see, really a no risk draft pick. Once you're that low in the draft, anything you get kind of is a bonus. They drafted a couple guys with familiar last names. Kyle Nevin, the son of Angels current manager Phil Nevin, and Jared Karros, the son of great hair haver Eric Karros. Either of those guys excite you?
I think so. Kyle Nevin's a 6'4" outfielder, some decent power. Obviously, he's a big guy. He's from Baylor. He was going to transfer to Oklahoma, or at least he was set to, but from what I've seen, it appears he's planning to sign. So he'll be in the organization. And then Jared Karros, pretty exciting arm, I think. He has missed, the last season and a half with a back injury, but a guy who might have been UCLA's Friday night starter, which is the college equivalent of the ace, equivalent of a game 1 starter, because the weekend series are typically the big series in college. Big guy, 6'7". The metrics on his fastball are pretty good. Not premium velocity, but still some projectability there. He's pretty lanky, and he's a big guy, so can definitely add some muscle, add some velocity, I think, in the Dodgers system, and maybe turn out to be a fun arm.
Yeah, Karros is one. When I heard about the pick and kind of read a little bit about him, he's one that jumped out to me as, oh, there's a guy who could benefit from the Dodgers system, because the Dodgers do have a history of drafting guys, and then suddenly 3 months later you see him throwing, and they're throwing 4 miles an hour harder than they had been.
Yeah, definitely. And his biggest thing is health. Once he gets back onto the field, I think, start building him up in the weight room and see what happens.
Awesome. Anybody else in this draft excite you that, somebody you thought, oh yeah, was there anybody who, when they were picked, you thought that's who I hope they would pick with that pick?
There was one guy where that's the pick I would have made at that slot. Jacob Meter, their 12th round pick out of Dallas Baptist. He fits, kind of these, modern trends for smaller pitchers, really low release rate. It's a, low to mid 90s fastball with plus vertical movement. He's got a breaking ball, exciting arm. I think if he had been taken, I think he should have gone on day 2 for sure. If a team had taken him in like the 4th or 5th round, I wouldn't have batted an eye, but if he falls to the 12th, then great pick, I think.
So by the time it came around to their pick with the 12th, he was like standing out to you as, okay, you got to take this guy now.
Yeah, well, I tweeted out a list of college players at the end of day 2 that I thought, like, these should be the top targets. And he was right at the top. Like, for me, it was him and one other guy who I was like, these guys should go in the next round. Ultimately, he fell a full 2 rounds to the end of the 12th round, and the Dodgers got him.
Awesome. The other catcher the Dodgers drafted, Simon Reed, in the 10th round. Anything to be excited about with him?
I haven't heard a whole lot on him, honestly. Westmont College guy, so the Dodgers have a couple Westmont guys in their player dev system. So I think they have a relationship with him. I know he's worked out at Driveline a little bit. So I know there are some definitely Dodger connections there. I think the interesting thing is he's not a senior, he's a junior. So typically 9th and 10th round, those are senior spots where you take guys who will sign, under slot. So you can get some more money for the rest of your draft class. But he's a junior, he's 21. So I think that to me speaks on, that might be, decently talented more so than like the average 10th round pick. And of course, that's not what every team does, but it is a pretty regular practice.
Yeah. And you mentioned slot value, kind of a quick primer on that basically every pick is assigned a slot value. You add those up, and that's how much money a team has to spend on the draft. Kind of. They can go 5% over that without penalties, and that doesn't include anything under, what is it, 125,000?
So that the 125,000 number applies to rounds 11 through 20.
Okay. So the slots just are for the first 10 rounds.
Yeah, first 10 rounds, you add up those, that's the bonus pool. And then for all the other picks and for undrafted free agents, anything below $125,000 does not count towards the slot. Anything over, it's just the difference between that and 125,000. So if a guy signs for 150, that's 25,000 towards the slot.
Okay. And the Dodgers, because they had their first pick dropped by 10 spots because they were so far over the luxury tax. They had their second pick they didn't get because of signing Freddie Freeman. They didn't get their compensation pick for losing Corey Seager because of signing Freddie Freeman. All that adds up to the Dodgers had not very many draft picks and low in each round because they had the second best record in baseball last year, which means the Dodgers ended up with the smallest total. What's the word I'm looking for?
Bonus pool
Of anybody in baseball, right?
Yeah, the smallest bonus pool by far.
And so they probably are looking for some guys to go under slot so that they can maybe go over slot with some other guys. Anybody jump out at you as a likely under slot guy?
I would think Dalton Rushing would be maybe a little under slot, but not substantially so. Looking at what they did last year when they were in a similar situation, they didn't have a second round pick after signing Trevor Bauer. They did pick 29th instead of 40th. They had a little more money to play with, but they took Maddox Bruns. They signed him under slot, and then they used some of that money to get Peter Huback in the third round and Nick Nastrini in the fourth round. Both of those guys signed for over slot. So I would think Rushing, or if they had taken a different college player there, probably just a little bit under slot. Nick Biddison, Virginia Tech. I think he turns 22 in the near future. So a little bit of an older guy, might be under slot. Brandon Neat, their 9th round pick, is a senior, so he might be under slot as well. Those are the guys, I think, off the bat that I think might be a little or maybe more under slot.
And is there anybody who jumps out at you as a guy they might need those under slot guys for because they might have to go pay a little extra to get this guy to sign?
Yeah, so we talked about Alex Freeland, who's a draft eligible sophomore. So I think this was a little bit higher than he was, ranked by most publications. So maybe not, but he has decent amount of leverage having, 2 full years left of college. So he can go, he might be an over slot guy. And then Logan Wagner, their 6th round pick, their only prep player in the first 10 rounds. He's a high school shortstop from South Carolina, committed to Louisville. Based on his social media, it looks like he's planning to sign, but I would expect that that would be an over slot bonus as well.
Okay. So kind of looking at the big picture, last year, the Dodgers drafted almost exclusively pitchers. I think everybody except one was a pitcher last year.
All except for 2, but they only signed one of those hitters.
Okay. And then this year, they only took 4 pitchers, 5 if you count the Christopher Campos, who you expect to or think might be a pitcher in addition to being a shortstop. But 4 out of 19 picks. Do you think that says anything other than the guy we liked most when our time to pick came didn't happen to be a pitcher, or is it some sort of are they balancing because they took so many pitchers last year?
Not necessarily. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I do think it's interesting, though. You mentioned last year, really pitcher-heavy draft. The year before, only 6 picks, but 4 of them were pitchers, and the first 3 were pitchers. They haven't really had this kind of draft infusion of position player talent, especially college position player talent, in the first 5 or 6 or 7 rounds, really the entire time under Billy Gasparino. So I think this will be fun to see how they develop this class, because if you look at the Dodgers' top offensive prospects, the majority of them are international guys. It's Michael Busch, Jacob Amaya, James Outman, and then a bunch of international guys at like the top of the Dodgers system for offense. So I do think it'll be interesting to see, how they develop these guys, because they've done pretty well with the pitchers in the last 2 class, at least so far. So I think it'll be fun for me, fun for fans who like following the system to see, how this class as a whole and the guys within it are developed.
Yeah, and like we talked about at the beginning, drafting all these shortstops, you could draft a team of shortstops and then just, drop them at shortstop and let them bounce like you're breaking a game of pool. And okay, wherever you landed, that's where you're playing. And if you're a shortstop, you can probably play left field or, second base or third base or wherever we need you. And so it will be interesting to see how all of these shake out over the next couple of years as they develop through the system.
Yeah, definitely. And there are some guys who I think, even within the next couple of years aren't going to be playing much shortstop, but we'll have to see. We'll see what happens once they get into the system, if they get into the system and start playing some real games.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions I have. Are there any questions that a smarter interviewer would have asked you?
A smarter interviewer?
Or better looking, either way, whichever route you want to go.
I don't know if I've ever had one of those.
Good answer. I like this guy.
No, I think we covered everything. One thing I will add is they did take quite a few prep players at the end of day 3. I'm interested to see which of them sign, how many of them sign. I know one, Peyton Martin, who's a right-handed pitcher from North Carolina, was committed to East Carolina. He was going to be a 2-way player in college, but he was drafted as a pitcher. It looks like he will be a pitcher in the system. They haven't really had many like day 3 prep arms come into their system. The last one that I was able to find was Braylon Jones, who was drafted in the 29th round in 2019. But typically the prep arms that they have taken have been either top 5 rounds or right at the start of day 3, round 11, which is when a lot of top prep players who didn't go in the first 2 days end up going. So I think it'll be interesting to see, what happens with him, because they just haven't taken anyone of that demographic in that range of the draft really in some time.
Yeah, that is interesting. As a high school player getting drafted that low, you got to really, really feel like the organization is committed to your success to make it worth signing instead of going to college and kind of bumping up your draft stock.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that'll be an interesting one to follow with any of the other high school players. Nicholas Perez, who's committed to Florida State, Cameron Decker, who's committed to Central Florida, and Carter McCulley, who's committed to Pensacola State College. If any of those guys sign, they're all listed as shortstops. Again, it'll be interesting because the Dodgers just haven't really signed any prep players in that range, not just arms, but prep players in general in that range in a while.
Awesome. Well, Justin, it is always fun talking with you. I appreciate having someone who spends as much time understanding this stuff so that I don't have to, so I can just ask questions and learn from you, because that's a lot easier than doing all the work that you're doing.
I appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, man.
All right, I want to thank Justin from Future Dodgers for hopping on with us, as he has done, I believe, the last 3 years, maybe the last 4 years. He brings the insight that we quite don't have with draft coverage, so thank you to him. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back on Monday to go over the Giants series, the rest of the Giants series, and hopefully talk about a 4-game sweep. If you need something else to listen to after us, you can check out Locked On MLB Prospects with host Lindsey Crosby. He's a prospect encyclopedia going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Samperio. You can call and leave us a voicemail or send us a text at 323-863-5625, or you can send us an email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car, or if you're at home. To our smart device play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree, you just have to listen. Have a good one.